You cheated on me. I got my revenge.
The rain hammered against the windshield as I sat in my pickup truck outside the courthouse, watching water cascade down the glass like the tears I refused to shed. 54 years old, and I was finally seeing the truth about the man I'd called my friend for over 3 decades. My name is Bennett Morrison, and this is the story of how I discovered that the person closest to me had been systematically destroying my family for years. It started 30 years ago at Hartwell Manufacturing, where I began as a floor worker making $8.50 an hour. The plant was a maze of conveyor belts, hydraulic presses, and the constant thunder of machinery that would leave your ears ringing long after your shift ended. I was 24, newly married to Abigail, and determined to build something solid. Wesley Cameron started the same week I did. He was different from the rest of us. College-educated, articulate, with manicured hands that had never known real labor. Management had placed him in our department as part of some corporate training program, learning the business from the ground up. While the rest of us were there because we had to be, Wesley was there because it looked good on his resume. "You know this is temporary for me, right?" he told me during our first lunch break, adjusting his safety glasses that somehow looked designer even in industrial yellow. "I'm just putting in my time before they move me upstairs." I should have seen the contempt in his eyes then, the way he looked at our grease-stained uniforms and calloused hands like we were a different species. But I was young and naive, and when he offered to buy me a beer after work, I thought it was friendship. Wesley was charming in a way that made you want to trust him. He had this ability to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room, hanging on your every word. He asked about my family, my dreams, my struggles with genuine interest, or what seemed genuine at the time. "You're different from the others here, Bennett," he'd say. "You've got ambition, drive. I can see it." 6 months later, Wesley got his promotion to the management track, just as he'd predicted. But unlike the other climbers who forgot where they came from, Wesley maintained his connection to the floor workers, specifically to me. "I want to help you advance," he told me over drinks at Murphy's Tavern. "You're wasting your potential down there." And he did help. Over the years, as Wesley climbed the corporate ladder, he threw opportunities my way. Better shifts, overtime assignments, small promotions that came with modest pay increases. Nothing too dramatic, Wesley was always careful about that, but enough to make me grateful. "You're like a brother to me, Bennett," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder. "Brothers look out for each other." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Abigail left when Isabella was 10 and Charlotte was 7. The official reason was that she needed to find herself, whatever that meant. The real reason, I suspected, was that being a mother and factory worker's wife wasn't the glamorous life she'd imagined at 19. She moved to Chicago, pursuing some vague career in marketing and communications. Her visits became sporadic, unpredictable, like storm fronts that would blow through our lives, bringing chaos and disappointment. "Where's Mommy?" Charlotte would ask, her 7-year-old voice trembling as another promised visit failed to materialize. "She's busy, sweetheart," I'd say, though busy with what I never knew. Wesley was there through all of it. He'd listen to my frustrations over beer and pretzels, offer advice about single parenting, even suggest child psychologists when the girls started acting out. "Kids are resilient," he'd say, "but they need stability, consistency." "You're giving them that?" He was right, and I threw myself into being both parents. Morning shifts meant I could be home when the girls got back from school. I helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, coached Isabella's Little League softball team. When Charlotte broke her arm falling off her bike, I was the one who held her in the emergency room, not Abigail. Wesley never had children of his own. His marriage to a woman named Patricia was childless by choice, he said. "Too much responsibility, too much risk," he'd explain. "I admire what you're doing, Bennett." I don't think I could handle it. But he was fascinated by my girls, always asking about their school, their friends, their dreams. When Isabella showed an interest in art, Wesley mysteriously knew about a summer program at the community college. When Charlotte struggled with math, he recommended a tutor whose daughter attended the same private school Wesley's niece went to. "You should consider private school for them," Wesley suggested one evening. We were sitting on my back porch, watching the girls play in the yard. "Public school here is limited. Girls like yours, they need better opportunities. Private school costs money I don't have," I replied, calculating overtime hours in my head. There are ways, Wesley said cryptically. Scholarships, work-study programs, let me make some calls. 2 weeks later, he had information about Millfield Academy, a prestigious prep school with a financial aid program. The paperwork was complicated, but Wesley helped me navigate it. The application required detailed financial information, employment history, even character references. I'll write you a reference, Wesley offered. As your supervisor, my word carries weight. Isabella and Charlotte both got accepted with substantial financial aid packages. The remaining tuition was manageable if I picked up extra shifts and weekend consulting work. You're changing their lives, Wesley told me as we watched them walk through Millfield's oak-paneled hallways in their crisp uniforms. This is how generational change happens. I felt proud, grateful. Wesley had helped me give my daughters opportunities I'd never dreamed of. They were mixing with kids whose parents were doctors, lawyers, business owners. Their world was expanding in ways mine never had. What I didn't realize was that Wesley was playing a longer game. The changes started subtly during the girls' teenage years. Isabella, now confident and articulate from her prep school education, began questioning things about our life that had never bothered her before. Dad, why do we live in this neighborhood? She asked one evening, looking around our modest living room with new eyes. Sarah's family has a house with a pool and a 3-car garage. Because this is what we can afford, I replied. And there's nothing wrong with this house. It's home. But I could see doubt creeping into her expression, a kind of embarrassment that cut deeper than any insult. Charlotte, always more sensitive, didn't voice her concerns directly. Instead, she became increasingly secretive about school events, claiming they weren't important enough for me to attend. It's just a stupid awards ceremony, she'd say. You don't need to take time off work. But I'd later find out from other parents that she'd won significant honors, achievements she'd hidden from me like secrets she was ashamed of. Wesley, meanwhile, had continued his climb up Hartwell's corporate ladder. He was now a senior vice president, driving a BMW and living in a gated community called Autumn Ridge. His wife, Patricia, had left him 2 years earlier. Irreconcilable differences, the divorce papers said. But Wesley seemed unaffected. Sometimes people grow apart, he explained when I asked. Patricia wanted one life, I wanted another. Better to be honest about it. He began showing more interest in the girls during this period, asking detailed questions about their friends, their activities, their college plans. When Isabella expressed interest in studying abroad, Wesley somehow knew about programs in Spain and France. When Charlotte mentioned wanting to learn photography, Wesley happened to know a professional photographer who might take on an intern. You're so good with them, I told him one evening. You should have had kids of your own. Wesley's expression grew thoughtful. Maybe I still will, he said. In my own way. I didn't understand what he meant then. Abigail's return to our lives coincided with Wesley's sudden interest in reconnecting with his old friend from the factory floor. She'd married a businessman named Marcus in Chicago, but that had ended badly. Now she was back in town, working as a real estate agent and living in a downtown apartment. The first sign something was wrong came when Wesley mentioned running into her at a coffee shop. Small world, he said casually. Your ex-wife is working for Henderson Realty now. We got to talking about old times. Old times? Wesley had barely known Abigail when we were married. They'd met maybe 3 times at company barbecues. But suddenly, Wesley was full of information about Abigail's new life. Her real estate career was taking off. She was really putting herself back together. She'd asked about the girls, wanted to rebuild those relationships. She seems different, Wesley told me. More mature. More focused. When Abigail started making regular visits again, I was cautiously optimistic. The girls were older now, more resilient. Maybe she could be a positive presence in their lives. But there was something off about her interactions with them. She was too interested in their school, their friends, their college plans. Too many questions about what I'd told them about the divorce, about their early childhood, about paternity. Dad, Mom asked me something weird yesterday, Isabella said one evening. She was 17 then, a senior at Millfield. She wanted to know if you'd ever talked to us about blood types or genetics. Blood types? Why would she ask that? I don't know. She said something about medical history being important for college health forms. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I dismissed it. Abigail had always been dramatic, always looking for ways to create chaos. This was probably just another manifestation of that. But the questions kept coming. Subtle inquiries about family resemblance, about the girl's interests and talents. Where did Isabella get her artistic ability? Who did Charlotte take after in her love of reading? You know, Abigail said to me one evening when she'd come to drop off Charlotte after dinner, it's funny how genetics work. The girls don't really look much like you, do they? They look like themselves, I replied. Beautiful, intelligent young women. Abigail smiled, but there was something calculating in her expression. I suppose that's true. Wesley's transformation began during the girls' senior year of high school. Suddenly, the man who'd been my friend and mentor for decades was taking a much more active interest in their future. College is expensive, he mentioned during one of our increasingly rare dinners together. Even with scholarships, you're looking at serious debt. He wasn't wrong. Isabella had been accepted to several prestigious universities, but the financial aid packages still left significant gaps. Charlotte was a year behind, but already stressing about the same issues. I've been thinking, Wesley continued, there might be ways I could help. Investment opportunities, educational trusts, that sort of thing. I can't accept charity, Wesley. You know that. It wouldn't be charity. It would be strategic family planning. The phrase struck me as odd, but Wesley had always been good with corporate speak. I figured it was just his way of making a business proposition sound official. Let me think about it, I said. But Wesley wasn't waiting for my decision. Unknown to me, he was already implementing his plan. It started with casual conversations with the girls. Wesley would show up at their school events, at coffee shops they frequented, at the mall where they worked part-time jobs. Always friendly, always supportive, always asking questions. Your father's done an amazing job raising you two, he'd tell them. But I worry about his ability to provide for your futures. The plant's been struggling. Layoffs are coming. This was news to me. When I asked Wesley about it directly, he was reassuring. Just rumors, he said. Nothing for you to worry about. Your position is secure. But he was telling the girls something different. According to what I pieced together later, Wesley was painting a picture of imminent financial disaster. The plant closing, my job disappearing, their college dreams evaporating. I care about you girls too much to let that happen, he'd say. There are ways I could help, but it would require rearranging some legal relationships. Wesley had done his research. As my supervisor, he had access to my personnel file, my salary history, my financial information from the girls' school aid applications. He knew exactly how stretched our budget was, how dependent we were on my continued employment. He also had access to something else, the divorce records from 15 years earlier. The first direct attack came from Abigail during Isabella's graduation party. It was a small gathering in our backyard. Family, close friends, a few classmates. Wesley was there, of course, playing the role of the successful family friend who'd helped make Isabella's education possible. Abigail pulled me aside during the evening, ostensibly to discuss Charlotte's upcoming senior year. Bennett, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. What is it, Abigail? She looked around nervously, as if checking to make sure we weren't being overheard. During our marriage, especially around the time I got pregnant with Isabella, were you ever suspicious about anything? Suspicious about what? About whether you were really the father. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell are you talking about? I'm not saying anything happened, Abigail said quickly. I'm just asking if you ever had doubts, if you ever wondered. No, Abigail, I never wondered, because you're their mother and I'm their father. End of discussion. But Abigail wasn't finished. It's just that I've been thinking about it lately, and there were some circumstances around that time, things I never told you. Stop. Just stop talking. Wesley suggested I should tell you. He said it wasn't fair to keep secrets from you after all these years. Wesley. My blood ran cold. Wesley suggested what? He's been so helpful, Bennett, so supportive. He really cares about the girls' futures. I walked away from her then, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, not in my mind. I knew those girls were mine, but in the overall situation. Why was Abigail bringing this up now? Why was Wesley involved in the conversation? The answer came 2 weeks later when Isabella sat me down for a serious talk. Dad, we need to discuss something as a family, she said, sounding older than her 18 years. Mom told Charlotte and me about some concerns she has about our paternity. Your paternity isn't in question, Isabella. You're my daughter. Charlotte is my daughter. That's not debatable. But Dad, what if it is? What if there are things we don't know? Charlotte, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. Wesley explained that it's important to have clarity about these things for medical reasons. Family history, genetic predispositions. Wesley again. When did Wesley explain this to you? Last week, Charlotte said. He took us to lunch and talked about the importance of knowing our true heritage. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. This wasn't random family drama. This was orchestrated. He also mentioned, Isabella continued, that if it turns out we're not biologically related to you, there might be ways he could help with our college expenses. As a family friend who wants to see us succeed. Help how? Legal adoption, Charlotte said quietly. If you're not our biological father, and if you're okay with it, Wesley could adopt us. It would give us access to better financial aid, better opportunities. I stared at my daughters, trying to process what I was hearing. You're talking about giving up your relationship with me based on speculation and rumors. Not giving up, Isabella said quickly, just clarifying. Making things official in a way that helps everyone. Everyone except me. Dad, don't be dramatic. You'd still be in our lives. You'd still be important to us. This would just be a legal technicality. A legal technicality. Those words would haunt me for months. I couldn't sleep that night. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, orchestrated. Wesley's sudden interest in the girls' futures, Abigail's convenient return to town, the timing of these paternity questions, it was all too neat, too coordinated. I decided to do some investigating of my own. The first stop was the courthouse, where divorce records were public information. I pulled my own file, something I hadn't looked at in 15 years. As I expected, it contained the paternity test results that had been required as part of the custody agreement. Isabella, 99.97% probability of paternity. Charlotte, 99.96% probability. Clear, unambiguous legal proof that both girls were mine. Girls. But as I read through the file more carefully, I found something I'd forgotten about. A note from my lawyer indicating that Abigail had initially contested the paternity results, claiming the tests were flawed or tampered with. The judge had ordered a second round of tests from a different lab, same results. Abigail had known for 15 years that I was the girl's biological father. She'd fought it legally and lost, so why was she raising questions now? The second stop was Henderson Realty, where Abigail worked. I didn't go inside, but I sat in the parking lot and watched. Around 2 p.m., Wesley's BMW pulled up. He went inside and stayed for over an hour. This wasn't a chance encounter at a coffee shop. This was regular contact. The third stop was the most revealing. I drove to Autumn Ridge, Wesley's gated community, and parked across the street. I didn't have to wait long. At 6:30 p.m., Abigail's car pulled through the security gate. She wasn't just working with Wesley on this plan. She was living with him. That evening, I called both girls and asked them to come over for dinner. When they arrived, I had the divorce files spread out on the kitchen table. We need to talk, I said. Isabella looked at the papers warily. What is all this? These are the court documents from your mother's and my divorce, including the paternity tests that proved legally and scientifically that you're both my daughters. Charlotte picked up one of the lab reports, scanning the technical language. These are 15 years old, Dad. Wesley said testing has improved a lot since then. Wesley said. Wesley explained. Wesley suggested. I looked at them both. When did Wesley become such an expert on our family? He's trying to help us, Isabella said defensively. He wants what's best for our futures. And what's best for your futures involves denying I'm your father. It's not about denying anything, Charlotte said. It's about being practical. If there's uncertainty, there's no uncertainty. I slammed my hand on the table, causing both girls to jump. Look at these documents. Look at the evidence. But I could see it in their eyes. They didn't want to look at the evidence. They wanted to believe Wesley's version of reality because Wesley's version came with financial security and prestigious opportunities. Dad, Isabella said carefully, even if these tests are accurate, that doesn't change the fact that Wesley is offering us something you can't. Better colleges, better connections, a better future. So, this isn't about paternity at all. This is about money. It's about opportunity, Charlotte corrected. Wesley explained how adoption works. We could keep our relationship with you exactly the same, but legally, we'd be his daughters. It would open doors. I looked at these two young women I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, and realized I was losing them to a carefully orchestrated con game. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, get out of my house. If you want Wesley to be your father, go live with him and your mother. But don't come back here expecting me to pretend this is normal. They left, and I spent the rest of the night staring at those paternity test results, wondering how the truth had become so easily dismissible. 2 days later, Wesley called me at work. Bennett, we need to talk. Can you meet me after your shift? I don't think we have anything to discuss, Wesley. I think we do. Murphy's Tavern, 7 o'clock. He hung up before I could refuse. I almost didn't go. But 30 years of friendship, even a friendship that had apparently been built on lies, demanded some kind of closure. Wesley was already there when I arrived, sitting in our usual booth in the back corner. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who held all the cards. Thanks for coming, he said as I sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Make it quick, Wesley. I've got nothing to say to you. That's the problem, Bennett. You've got everything to say, but you're not saying it. You're letting pride get in the way of what's best for Isabella and Charlotte. What's best for them is not being manipulated by a sociopath. Wesley smiled. Sociopath? That's a little dramatic, don't you think? I'm trying to help your daughters achieve their potential. By convincing them I'm not their father. By giving them options you can't provide. Wesley leaned forward. Look around, Bennett. Look at your life. You're 54 years old working the same job you started 30 years ago. You live in the same small house, drive the same old truck, wear the same work clothes. You've given those girls everything you could, but everything you could give isn't enough for what they want to become. So, you decided to steal them from me. I decided to offer them a better future. Isabella wants to study international business. Do you know what that costs? Charlotte wants to be a photographer. Do you know what kind of connections that requires? Wesley's voice remained calm, reasonable. I can give them those things. You can't. With Abigail's help. Wesley shrugged. Abigail sees the situation clearly. She knows I can provide for her daughters in ways their biological father never could. The word biological was delivered with subtle emphasis, as if the genetic connection was somehow less important than financial capability. You son of a bitch, I said. You planned this. How long have you been planning this? Does it matter? What matters is that it's the right thing for everyone involved. Everyone except me. You'll always be important to them, Bennett. But as their uncle figure, not their father, it's a more appropriate relationship anyway, given the circumstances. I stared at him, finally seeing clearly after 30 years of blindness. You hate me. You've always hated me. Wesley's mask slipped just slightly. Hate is a strong word. But have I been frustrated watching you waste opportunities? Yes. Have I been annoyed by your stubborn pride and your refusal to let me help you advance in your career? Yes. Have I been concerned that your limitations would eventually limit Isabella and Charlotte? Absolutely. So you decided to remove me from the equation. I decided to optimize the family structure for everyone's benefit. He was using corporate speak to describe the destruction of my relationship with my daughters, and the calm rationality of it made me angrier than any screaming match could have. The girls have made their choice, Bennett. They want the opportunities I can provide. They want to be part of a family that can support their ambitions. You can either accept that gracefully or you can fight it and lose them completely. I've already lost them, haven't I? This conversation is just you gloating. This conversation is me giving you a chance to be part of the transition, to maintain some relationship with them, even if it's not the primary relationship. I stood up from the booth. Go to hell, Wesley. Think about it, Bennett. Think about what's really best for Isabella and Charlotte. Not what's best for your ego, but what's best for them. I walked away, but I could feel his eyes on my back as I left. He was confident I'd come around, that I'd accept his terms rather than lose the girls completely. He was wrong. What followed was 6 months of the most intense psychological warfare I'd ever experienced. Wesley had resources I couldn't match: money, connections, legal expertise. But I had something he didn't: the truth, and 30 years of parenting experience. The first battle was financial. Within a week of our conversation at Murphy's Tavern, I received a letter from Hartwell Manufacturing's Human Resources Department. Budget cuts were requiring the elimination of several positions in my department. My job would be terminated in 60 days. Wesley's signature was on the letterhead as the approving manager. I could have fought it: wrongful termination, retaliation, workplace harassment. But Wesley had been careful. He'd documented every favor he'd done for me over the years, every opportunity he'd provided, every small advancement I'd received. On paper, it looked like he'd been carrying a subpar employee for decades out of misguided loyalty. The second battle was legal. Abigail filed a motion to modify our custody agreement, claiming new information about the girl's paternity warranted a re-evaluation of parental rights. She was represented by one of the city's most expensive family law firms, clearly paid for by Wesley. I hired the best lawyer I could afford with my severance pay and took out a second mortgage on the house to cover legal fees. The third battle was personal. Wesley began systematically undermining my relationship with Isabella and Charlotte. He enrolled them in expensive summer programs, bought them cars, paid for designer clothes and electronics. Every gift came with a subtle message: this is what your real family can provide for you. Meanwhile, Abigail worked on them emotionally. She talked about how guilty she felt for deceiving me about their paternity all these years. How Wesley was the kind of man who could give them the life they deserved. How staying with me was holding them back from their true potential. Your father is a good man, she'd tell them, but he's limited. Wesley understands ambition. Wesley can open doors. By the end of the summer, I'd lost my job, spent my savings on legal fees, and watched my daughters drift further and further away from me. They still visited, but the conversations were stilted, uncomfortable. They were clearly conflicted, torn between loyalty to the man who'd raised them and attraction to the opportunities Wesley offered. I was working my new job, night security at a warehouse, a significant step down from my manufacturing position, when I got a call from Charlotte. She was crying. "Dad, can you come home?" Something's happened. I left work immediately and found both girls waiting in my living room. Isabella's face was pale and angry. Charlotte was holding a manila envelope. "We found something," Charlotte said. "In Wesley's office." She handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before: financial records, legal contracts, correspondence between Wesley and various institutions. The first document was a life insurance policy. Wesley had taken out $1 million policy on me 2 years earlier, listing himself as the beneficiary. As my supervisor, he'd had access to my personal information and had apparently forged my signature on the application. The second document was more damning: a detailed financial analysis of what it would cost Wesley to support Isabella and Charlotte through college and into their early careers. The number was substantial, but at the bottom of the page was a handwritten note: recoverable through insurance settlement and plant pension access. The third document was the most devastating: correspondence with a private investigator Wesley had, hired to find compromising information about my past that could be used to discredit me in a custody battle. "There's more," Isabella said quietly. She handed me a small digital recorder. "We recorded this yesterday." I pressed play and heard Wesley's voice, talking to someone on the phone. "The plan is working perfectly. Bennett's losing his job next month, which puts him in a desperate financial position. The girls are already pulling away from him emotionally. Once we establish legal paternity uncertainty, the adoption should be straightforward. Yes, I understand there are risks, but the life insurance policy covers those contingencies. No, Bennett doesn't suspect anything. He's too trusting, too naive. He still thinks I'm his friend." I looked up at my daughters, both of whom were staring at me with horror and shame. "Dad," Charlotte whispered, "we're so sorry. We didn't know. We thought he was just trying to help us." "How did you find these?" I asked. "Mom," Isabella said. "She found the insurance policy and got suspicious. She's been secretly copying his files for weeks." "Where is she now?" "Outside," Charlotte said. "She's afraid to face you." I went to the front door and found Abigail sitting in her car, crying. When she saw me, she got out and walked over. "Bennett, I am so sorry. I had no idea how far he'd taken this. I thought it was just about providing better opportunities for the girls. I didn't know about the insurance policy, the investigator, the plan to, to what, Abigail? To make sure you couldn't interfere with his custody plans. She was shaking. He's been talking about having you declared an unfit parent, maybe even having you arrested for some kind of fraud. He's completely obsessed with having control over Isabella and Charlotte. I felt cold all over. Why? Why would he go to these lengths? Because he's sick, Bennett. Really sick. He sees the girls as possessions, as proof of his success. He wants to own them completely. We went back inside where Isabella and Charlotte were waiting anxiously. What do we do now? Isabella asked. I looked at these two young women who had been manipulated and deceived just as thoroughly as I had. They were victims in this too, and they needed their father to be strong. Now we fight back, I said. Working with Abigail and the girls, we developed a plan to expose Wesley's true intentions. It was risky, but it was our only chance to stop him permanently. The plan required Isabella to continue playing along with Wesley's adoption scheme while secretly gathering evidence. She would wear a wire during their meetings and try to get him to admit to the insurance fraud and other illegal activities. Charlotte's role was to provide information about Wesley's schedule and movements. As part of his manipulation campaign, he'd been taking her to various business meetings and social events, showing her off as his soon-to-be daughter. She had access to his calendar and knew when he'd be vulnerable. Abigail's job was the most dangerous. She had to continue living with Wesley while secretly documenting his activities and copying relevant files. If he discovered what she was doing, there was no telling how he might react. My role was to be bait. I had to act like a man who was broken, desperate, willing to accept defeat. Wesley needed to believe he'd won completely so that he'd let his guard down. It took 3 weeks to gather enough evidence to build a case. During that time, I had to endure watching Wesley parade around town with my daughters, acting like the proud father at college orientation events and family gatherings. I had to listen to Isabella's recordings of him talking about his girls and their bright futures under his guidance. The hardest part was a conversation Isabella recorded where Wesley explained his long-term plans. Once the adoption is finalized, we'll move to a different state, somewhere with better opportunities. Bennett won't be able to follow us, and even if he tries, he'll have no legal standing. The girls will be mine completely. When I heard that, I understood that this wasn't just about money or opportunity. Wesley wanted to erase me from my daughters' lives entirely. The final confrontation was set for a Friday evening in November. Wesley had invited Isabella and Charlotte to dinner at an expensive restaurant to celebrate the beginning of our new family relationship. He'd been pressuring them to sign preliminary adoption papers, and they'd agreed to do it that night. What Wesley didn't know was that the entire restaurant had been cleared by the police, who were working with us to set up a sting operation. The life insurance fraud alone was enough to warrant criminal charges, but we wanted to catch him in the act of coercing the girls into signing legal documents under false pretenses. I arrived at the restaurant early and took a table where I could watch but not be easily seen. The police had wired the dining room for sound and stationed officers at all the exits. Wesley arrived promptly at 7, looking confident and triumphant. He was wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that presumably contained the adoption papers. Isabella and Charlotte arrived a few minutes later, both looking nervous but determined. The dinner started normally, with Wesley playing the role of the generous benefactor discussing the girls' college plans and career prospects. But as the evening progressed, his true nature began to emerge. The important thing to understand, he told them over dessert, is that this adoption represents a clean break from your past. Bennett was a placeholder, a temporary caretaker. I'm your real future. What about maintaining a relationship with Dad? Charlotte asked. Wesley's expression hardened slightly. That wouldn't be advisable. Divided loyalties create complications. You need to choose your family clearly and definitively. But he raised us, Isabella said. He sacrificed everything for us. He did what any decent person would do in his situation. But decent isn't enough for what you girls are capable of achieving. You need excellence. You need connections. You need someone who understands how the world really works. As Wesley talked, his words became increasingly possessive and controlling. He outlined restrictions on where the girls could go to college, only schools he approved of, what they could study, business or law, nothing frivolous like art or photography, and even who they could date, no one without his explicit approval. "I'm making a significant investment in your futures," he said. "I expect appropriate returns on that investment." Isabella and Charlotte exchanged glances. This wasn't the benevolent father figure they'd been promised. "What kind of returns?" Isabella asked. "Loyalty? Obedience? Success that reflects well on me?" Wesley leaned forward, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I'm not doing this out of charity, girls. I'm building something here. A legacy. You're part of that legacy now, which means you represent me in everything you do." Charlotte shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "That sounds more like ownership than adoption." Wesley's smile was cold. "Call it whatever you want. The reality is that I'm offering you opportunities that come with expectations. Meet those expectations, and you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. Fail to meet them." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say there are consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Isabella asked. "Financial support can be withdrawn. College tuition can be cut off. Professional connections can be severed. It's amazing how quickly doors can close when the right person decides they should." The mask was completely off now. This wasn't a loving father figure. This was a predator who'd been grooming them for years. "And what about our real father?" Charlotte asked quietly. Wesley's expression darkened. "Bennett is irrelevant. In fact, it would be better for everyone if he simply disappeared from the picture entirely." "What do you mean, disappeared?" Isabella's voice was sharp with alarm. "I mean, stop being a complication. Stop interfering with your development. Stop reminding you of a life that was holding you back." Wesley's voice carried a subtle threat. "There are ways to ensure that happens." That was my cue. I stood up from my table and walked over to theirs, pulling out the chair next to Wesley and sitting down. "Hello, Wesley," I said calmly. The shock on his face was immediate and complete. His confident demeanor cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. "Bennett, what are you doing here?" "Having dinner with my daughters," I replied. "Something I've been doing for 20 years. Wesley looked around frantically, suddenly aware that something was very wrong. The restaurant was too quiet, too empty except for a few tables occupied by people who looked distinctly like law enforcement. "You set me up," he said, his voice filled with rage. "You set yourself up, Wesley. I just gave you enough rope." The girls were staring at Wesley with horror and disgust. The man they'd thought was their savior had just revealed himself to be a manipulative predator who saw them as possessions to be controlled. "Everything you heard tonight was recorded," I continued. "The threats, the coercion, the admission that you see my daughters as investments to be managed. Combined with the evidence of insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, you're looking at serious federal charges." Wesley stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine." "Actually, it's your word against your word." I pulled out a small recording device. "Everything you just said is on here. Everything you said to Isabella over the past 3 weeks is on here. Everything you said to that private investigator you hired is on here." Wesley's face went white as he realized the full scope of the trap he'd walked into. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think this is over? I'll destroy you, Bennett. I'll destroy all of you. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually, I do." I stood up to face him. "You're capable of spending 30 years pretending to be my friend while planning to steal my daughters. You're capable of insurance fraud and forgery. You're capable of manipulating vulnerable young women with false promises. But you know what you're not capable of, Wesley?" "What?" "Being a father. Being a decent human being. Being anything other than a pathetic, controlling sociopath who preys on people who trusted you." Wesley lunged at me then, his careful composure finally shattered completely, but I was ready for him. 30 years of factory work had kept me strong, and 30 years of his psychological manipulation had given me plenty of motivation. The fight was brief but violent. Wesley threw the first punch, catching me in the jaw, but I responded with an uppercut that sent him staggering backward into another table. He came at me again, swinging wildly, but I grabbed him by his expensive suit jacket and threw him against the wall. "Dad, stop!" Charlotte screamed, but I was beyond hearing her. Wesley pulled himself up and charged me again, this time with a steak knife he'd grabbed from the table. The sight of the weapon triggered something primal in me. This man had threatened my family, had tried to steal my daughters, had planned God knows what other horrors. I caught his wrist as he swung the knife at me, twisting, until he dropped it. Then I grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall again. "You want to know what consequences look like, Wesley?" I growled, my face inches from his. "This is what happens when you threaten my family. This is what happens when you try to destroy everything I've worked for. This is what happens when you forget that some of us learned to fight before we learned to talk." Wesley was gasping for air, his expensive suit torn and bloody. For the first time in 30 years, he looked genuinely afraid. "Please," he wheezed. "I'm sorry. I'll stop. I'll leave you alone." Too late for sorry, Wesley. Way too late. The police chose that moment to intervene, pulling me away from Wesley and restraining both of us. But the damage was done, not just physically, but psychologically. Wesley's carefully constructed image of superiority and control had been shattered in front of the girls he'd tried to possess. Wesley Cameron was arrested that night and charged with insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted coercion. The evidence we'd gathered was overwhelming, and his own recorded words sealed his conviction. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution. Abigail testified against him at the trial, providing crucial evidence about his manipulation and control tactics. She also formally apologized to me and the girls for her role in the scheme, though she maintained she hadn't known about the more sinister aspects of Wesley's plan. The girls and I went through months of family therapy to repair the damage that had been done to our relationships. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. But we were all committed to healing the wounds that Wesley had inflicted on our family. Isabella changed her major from international business to social work, saying she wanted to help other families who had been torn apart by manipulation and abuse. Charlotte pursued her photography dreams, eventually becoming a freelance artist whose work focused on themes of family, loyalty, and resilience. I found a new job at a smaller manufacturing company, where I eventually worked my way up to plant supervisor. The experience with Wesley had taught me to be more cautious about who I trusted, but it hadn't made me cynical about human nature. 3 years later, I walked both my daughters down the aisle at their weddings. Isabella to a social worker she'd met in graduate school, Charlotte to a teacher she'd fallen in love with during college. They both kept my name, and their children call me Grandpa. Wesley sent letters from prison for the first 2 years, alternately apologizing and threatening, trying to maintain some kind of psychological hold over us. We stopped reading them after the first few and had our lawyer handle all communication. The last I heard, Wesley was released on parole after serving 6 years. He'd moved to another state and was working as a used car salesman under supervision. His attempts to rebuild his life were hampered by his criminal record and the publicity from his trial. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Wesley's greatest weapon wasn't his money or his connections. It was his patience. He spent 3 decades building trust, establishing himself as a friend and mentor, positioning himself to strike when the opportunity presented itself. The scariest part is how close he came to succeeding. If Abigail hadn't found that insurance policy, if the girls hadn't been smart enough to recognize the warning signs, if we hadn't all worked together to expose the truth, Wesley might have achieved his goal of stealing my daughters and erasing me from their lives. But we did work together, and we did expose the truth, and in the end, the bonds of real family proved stronger than the false promises of a manipulative predator. Wesley thought he understood power, that money and connections and careful manipulation could overcome love and loyalty and decades of genuine relationship. He was wrong. The real lesson isn't that evil is always punished or that good always triumphs. The real lesson is that family, real family, built on love and sacrifice and shared experience, is stronger than any scheme designed to tear it apart. Wesley Cameron spent 30 years planning his perfect crime, but he made one crucial miscalculation. He underestimated the power of a father's love for his daughters and the power of daughters' love for their father. In the end, that love was stronger than all his money, all his manipulation, and all his carefully laid plans. Some bonds can't be broken, no matter how hard someone tries to cut them. Some families can't be destroyed, no matter how sophisticated the attack. And sometimes, the guy in the work boots and patched jeans knows more about real strength than the guy in the expensive suit ever will. That's a lesson Wesley learned too late in a prison cell, wondering how his perfect plan had fallen apart so completely. But it's a lesson my daughters and I carry with us every day. Real family is worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. and we'll never stop fighting for each other, no matter who tries to tear us apart.